This podcast discusses sexual violence and other material listeners may find distressing. Please look after yourself as you listen and feel free to switch off at any point. You can visit withyouwecan.org to find help, but remember to call 000 in emergencies. We're recording on the lands of the Gadigal, where sovereignty was never ceded. We recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples continue to experience the ongoing impacts of colonisation, including disproportionate rates of sexual violence and institutional harm. We pay our respects to elders past and present and commit to advocacy that does not replicate the harms it seeks to address. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Victim survivors live in a constant state of the unknown. I know that because I've lived it. Shrouded in secrecy, silenced by process, we're asked to place our faith in a justice system that was never designed for us, at the most vulnerable moment of our lives. But I won't stand for it. We're cracking this system wide open so you and everyone around you understands what it actually means to navigate the legal system after sexual violence. I'm Sarah Rosenberg, Executive Director of With You We Can, and this is what no one told us. Karen Iles is the Director and Principal Solicitor at Violet Co-Legal and Consulting. Her practice focuses on workplace law, discrimination and corporate governance, but she's increasingly recognised for her expertise in representing victim survivors of sexual assault and her law reform advocacy in this area. Karen is an adjunct professor of practice at the University of Newcastle School of Law and Justice. She was a finalist in the New South Wales Women of the Year Award for last year, winner of Private Practitioner of the Year, Women Lawyers Association 2023, a finalist for Women Lawyer of the Year 2023, and winner of the Pro Bono Service Award, Law Society of New South Wales 2022. Karen also holds many board appointments: Our Watch, the National Justice Project, First Australians Capital. She chairs the Safety and Wellbeing Committee at ANU and is an advisory board member at Sydney Women's Fund. Karen is a Darug Aboriginal woman and speaks publicly about her own personal experience of attempting to access justice in relation to sexual assaults. Her legal representation and advocacy for Aboriginal women and children who are victims of violence and homicide has recently been spotlighted in The Guardian Australia's award-winning Broken Trust series. Karen, you've been on both sides of this system as a victim survivor and as a lawyer working within it. It has been the biggest privilege working alongside you and learning from you. Despite your background in employment law, you've stepped into the sexual assault space simply due to the need. I do want to start though with your lived experience because I think it speaks so clearly to a lot of what we'll be unpacking.
Sure.
You had just turned 14 when you were on holiday at the Gold Coast, Coolangatta.
Yep.
So stuck between two jurisdictions there.
Yeah, it's right on the border. So it's Coolangatta and Tweed Heads. There's literally, we were staying on the main road that was the border. So these assaults happened
What are the odds? Yeah.
on both sides of the border.
So you had just turned 14 when you were gang raped by around 15 adult men.
Yeah.
Legal sources have said that it's one of the most serious allegations that have been made across the entire country. But police in Queensland have failed to do any meaningful investigation. They haven't interviewed you, your co-victim. What happened? What happened when you reported? 23 years later, when you reported, which is ahead of the curve as we've spoken about for most victims of child sexual assault. And it's now been over 20 years.
Yeah, since I reported. Yeah.
What happened?
I think that's a really great question for Queensland Police and also New South Wales Police. There was more than a 20-year delay in them lifting a finger either. And like I said, there were a series of aggravated child sexual assaults. And aggravated, in legal speak, is
it's its own class.
It's its own class of crime, and it means when there's more than two perpetrators or two or more. And also when someone, for example, like what happened to me, was locked in a room, so deprived of liberty, or there was a weapon, which was also an aggravating factor in one of the instances for me. And yeah, so I think it's a very good question for Queensland Police and New South Wales Police to have to come to grips with, and they seem to skirt the issue. And I think that my situation is not uncommon. And that's exactly why I chose to speak out, because as I, in my 40s was speaking out more publicly about what had happened to me as a 14-year-old, so many other women and some men confided in me similar stories and similar experiences of going to police and then it just going into this mysterious hole.
Into the abyss.
Into the abyss. And so I felt compelled as a lawyer that I have duties under the Legal Profession Act to uphold justice and to call out injustice where I see it happening and to assist the court and to assist in the administration of justice. That's my duty as a lawyer. So I feel that deeply as a victim survivor, I have a duty to other victim survivors. As a woman, as an Aboriginal woman, I have a duty to others and a responsibility and an obligation. But also as a lawyer, I have a responsibility and an obligation to really support improvements to the system. And for me, so, these assaults happened when I was 14 and I reported to police in person when I was 23 years of age. And that's really ahead of the curve for child victims. Child victims typically report in their 40s. And so for me, having then had this lapse in time from reporting when I was 23 until my early 40s when I really started to lose my patience with the constant excuses and the constant, someone will call you back, sorry, the right person isn't here for you to speak to, we'll take a message. I finally kind of lost my patience and started speaking out publicly about how ridiculous this whole system is.
Did anyone ever explicitly say, we're not investigating, or did it just quietly fall into that hole?
No, it was just a constant flow of, someone will call you back, the right person isn't here for you to speak to. There was no, and in fact, the investigation is still open in both jurisdictions. And so it makes it very difficult to actually speak openly and publicly about the circumstances because technically, despite there being a more than 20-year lag in any meaningful anything from police, that it makes it very difficult to speak about.
You're gagged.
Essentially, that's right. But I think that it's in the interests of justice that victims do speak out about these things, and that it is in the interest of justice that I call out this unacceptable delay in our legal processes.
Absolutely.
And I think as well it's, the reforms that you and I have worked on together, which has been a delight, through the Australian Law Reform Commission of, that this is unacceptable. And what these types of unexplained voids, unexplained silences can cause real harm to victims. It means that, and I'm not a psychologist, I'm a lawyer, but it means that victims can internalise and blame themselves and think, well, why aren't I good enough? Why don't I deserve for police to do something? Why don't I deserve what we see on Law and Order SVU?
Yeah.
Why don't I deserve that? Is there something wrong with me? Do they not believe me? Is there some, what have I done to make them not do anything? And victims can internalise this.
Yeah.
And it can create, I believe, from speaking to psychologists and psychiatrists, not for my own treatment, but just academically, it can create significant mental harm.
Yeah, incredible harm. And I mean, harming victims is one thing that is not okay. And the other is that, I mean, the system's just not operating the way the community expects it to.
No.
I mean, we're told the problem is underreporting. What's the real problem?
The real problem is police inaction. And so what we see is of the 9% now of victim survivors that choose to report their sexual assaults to police. Of those 9%, what we see in some jurisdictions, and we see from the fabulous research that's been done in the ACT by Rachel Bergen and her team, is that the vast majority of cases, and in her report by memory, it was 98% of cases in the ACT over an 18-month period where victim survivors had reported sexual assault to police, the police did nothing.
Nothing.
In 98%. So what does that do in our community? It means that as women, as men, as gender diverse people, we all talk to each other, you know, and we all have these collective stories. I mean, I've heard from women in their 90s saying, I reported in the 60s, or I reported something. You speak to young women in their 20s, I reported to police. You speak to women and men across all spectrums, and the story is very similar, is that nothing happened.
It's like victims aren't withdrawing willingly, they're being ousted.
That's right. And what the ACT study, and the reason we focus on the ACT is because no other state or territory has done the research. And I think what we would find is that, you know, it would be the same. But what they found is where police had recorded that a victim had withdrawn was that the victim didn't even realise that it had been recorded that way. So that was a surprise to them. But also many victims reported that they just withdrew because they were fed up after years of waiting. And they just said, you know what, don't bother. It's quite clear to me that you're not going to do anything to help me. And it's not just about helping the victims, it's about holding these men accountable.
Exactly.
And
right.
I say men because,
it's
we know that 95% or more of perpetrators are men. It's just so out of step with what our community expects, and it
doesn't pass the pub test. That's what you've always said.
It doesn't, and it's just so unfathomable, and the political inaction is just really concerning.
I think if you ask, any general member of the public what the one job of a police officer is, it's to investigate crime.
Yeah, totally.
But your campaign, Make Police Investigate, highlight something.
We were originally going to call that campaign Police Do Your Job.
Do your job.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't Police Do Your Job, Cops Do Your Job. And we thought, that's a bit confrontational. But essentially, that is the expectation that our society has, that if you go and report a serious crime, if you go and report a dog barking next door or some...
Leave that dog alone.
Fine. They might not have time to investigate that. But aggravated sexual violence of a child? I'm sorry. But, and we commissioned, as part of this campaign, we commissioned a social research. So, the phone calling surveys, and we had the lovely team at Essential Media do that for us. And what that result came back with was that 88% of Australians thought and agreed, and strongly agreed, with the statement that police should be compelled by law to investigate aggravated child sexual assault. If police aren't investigating the aggravated sexual assault of children, what the hell are they doing?
What are they doing? So Make Police Investigate highlights something that most people don't know, which is that police don't actually have a legal duty
Correct.
to investigate sexual assault. when someone reports, what are they guaranteed?
Nothing.
Nothing.
They're not guaranteed that they will have an interview. They're not guaranteed that they'll have the opportunity to make a sworn statement. They're not guaranteed that the police will investigate in any meaningful way. They're not guaranteed that the police will go and interview or even go pay a visit to the named perpetrator. They're not guaranteed the police will interview a co-victim or a witness and all these things. And even though there are some rules that are meant to guarantee that evidence is stored correctly and safely and securely, in reality, the number of clients that I've had where police have lost essential evidence.
Lost.
I'm not sure how that happens.
I'm not sure how that happens.
So it's a very concerning situation, and I think that there's a lot of things that I think could be behind it, but I think really the people who need to be interrogated and really put under the spotlight to answer these questions honestly and truthfully under oath are police.
So is it fair to say that whether or not a case is investigated comes down to discretion rather than obligation?
Absolutely. And police often cite that operational requirements will determine what they do and don't investigate. And I think that what our community expects is that operational requirements would require that the most serious crimes are prioritised. So crimes such as murder, such as aggravated child sexual assault, you would think that they'd be top of the list. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think that what happens is a few different factors. Firstly, who the victim is and how they present, who the perpetrator is and how they present, who the police officer is that takes that initial report and the biases that they have, the culture within the police station, and whether or not that police officer who took that report and was leading the case, whether or not they are in a supportive culture in order to make changes. And then the type of crime. So if I can talk about each 5 of those. So firstly, I think the victim. How does the victim look? Does the victim look like the perfect victim? Young, white, pretty, and to excuse my language because I don't agree with these statements obviously, but do they look like someone you'd like to rape? As opposed to the stereotypes and what you hear from coming out of the manosphere of, I wouldn't rape that.
Yeah.
That woman's, you wouldn't rape that with a, you know.
Oh, it makes me feel so ill.
It's revolting, those kind of statements. But we often hear that about women of colour, Aboriginal women, women who are overweight, women who have a disability, women who are older. Older
women.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's that of how women who are lesbian, or men, or gender diverse or trans, you know, so unless you're a particular type of victim that looks like what you think a victim on TV looks like, I think that's one of the barriers. The second is who's the perpetrator. So if the perpetrator is a wealthy man or teenager who comes in lawyered up with parents talking about this will destroy their career, this will destroy their reputation, you don't want to do this, we're going to, you know, we've got lawyers crawling all over this police investigation. The intimidation that would place a normal police officer doing their job, I would find that, I mean, you can imagine the bullying that would go on in that situation. So there's who the perpetrator is.
I think another really typical example to talk about in that who is the perpetrator category is someone known to police, someone as in a mate of the police officer.
Absolutely.
In a close-knit community,
Absolutely.
in a First Nations community. I
Absolutely.
think of in particular That's a big one too.
Yeah, I mean, I've had one client who's from a small community, and anecdotally, she knows that the police frequent the venue that is owned by her perpetrator. And everyone does, because it's a small community and it's the local place that you go to for a Friday night out.
And it would ruin the vibe if we had to hold him accountable.
So, but it's also who is the perpetrator, you know, is the perpetrator the type of perpetrator that police are interested in seeing as a perpetrator?
Yes.
So Aboriginal men, Muslim men, the list goes on. The next one is, you know, that piece of, well, who's at the front desk, or who picks up the phone when you make that first contact with police? And so what we know from social research, so the ABC Australia Talks survey is very good on this point, and it says that 60% of men, just on face value, will not believe a disclosure from a woman or a girl about sexual violence. And they play into all those myths of, oh, well, she must have regretted it. She must have been asking for it. She must have, what was she wearing? You know, all of these things. Was she drunk? All of these myths. So 60% of men, that research says, don't believe a disclosure. And 30% of women don't believe a disclosure from another woman. Shame on them. And you think, well, police are just like all of us. And so if you just blanket applied 60% of male police and 30% of female police won't believe the disclosure, and it's a male-dominated profession.
Yeah.
So who you're reporting to, are they likely to believe you? You're also potentially reporting to someone who is themselves experiencing vicarious trauma from the nature of their work day to day. And so when you experience vicarious trauma, you can tend to minimise things. You can tend to dismiss them. So that's important. But even if you get a good police officer who is diligent and who is compassionate and trauma-informed and does their very best, if they're within the culture, and this is where the Queensland inquiry into domestic violence and police attitudes and responses is very good, that 2022 judicial review and inquiry says that the systemic culture within these police stations or within the police local area command is very important, because if particularly for women, there's a lot of evidence of sexism and misogyny towards women and racism towards women in the force. And so can you imagine if you were a police officer trying to raise this case up through the ranks and have it taken seriously by your local superiors, if you're in a culture where it doesn't support that worldview, that victims, you know, you would be bonkers to go report something, like to put yourself through this. It would just be so unusual to find that a victim is not telling the truth. And then the fifth aspect is the type of crime. So is it the type of crime that police find difficult to fathom or difficult to investigate? So in the case of gang rape, you've got, in my case, 2 victims. So in my case, I'm lucky. I had a co-victim. And yet still no investigation. But in most cases, it's one victim against a whole football team, a whole, you know, group of men who are all lawyered up. And so it's a very difficult crime, I think, for police to get their head around how they investigate that and how they balance the viewpoint and the experience and the truth of victims against what so many, a wall of perpetrators are saying. The other problem, I think, the other types of categories is where police, I think, tend to struggle is in that definition of consent, and which is what so many activists in Australia have been talking about, of where I think our laws on consent are perfectly fine and quite clear. But what we see in research is that police don't understand those or don't apply the law. So that's one of the other things. If it's not like some stranger in a balaclava raping a woman on her way home through a deserted park of an evening, I mean, which I've got to say is not too dissimilar from my own personal experience of being, gang raped on a remote beach in the middle of the night. But, like, if it doesn't look like that, then, if it's within a family context, if it's within a context of a Tinder date gone terribly wrong, there's a struggle there. So I think it's those 5 factors that really influence police, and this concept of discretion and the unconscious bias of police at every one of those 5 different points. In my view, that's what gets in the way.
Yeah. It's like when we, ask how early decisions are being made about whether a case is worth pursuing, it's quite literally at the door, or at the first phone call.
You look at the research and the thought leadership of Malcolm Gladwell, that American author. He wrote the book Blink. People who have 10,000 hours of experience, he talks about, but also it's people make a judgment in a flash, and it's how the victim looks, how the victim presents, how the perpetrator looks, how their lawyers are lawyering up, right? What the crime is. All of these things are just straight away. You look at Lindy Chamberlain, the case of Lindy Chamberlain, and the decisions that were made about her conduct as a grieving mother didn't seem to fit the mould. And there are many other cases in our legal system about that, of how judgments were made very early on about how a person, a victim of a crime, or the mother of a crime against their children, are judged for how they turn up.
How do these failures look different for First Nations women?
Oh, just times by a million.
Quite simply, times infinity.
I mean, I was in Newcastle on the day that the report into missing and murdered First Nations women and children. It was a parliamentary inquiry.
And you gave evidence.
I gave evidence of that inquiry, and many First Nations women in my community and social circles have spoken to me about the murders and sexual assaults and disappearances. I think you get them in a continuum. You look at the case of Cindy and Mona Smith out in Burke, where it wasn't just a disappearance and a murder, but there was also a sexual assault. They tend to go hand in hand, but we tend not to talk about the rape. And I was with a number of Aboriginal women on that day. Probably I was skipping around seeing different clients, 3 different client sites, and all working with Aboriginal women, and a few different Aboriginal women at each different location I was in on that day. And every single one of those women had a personal story from their family or their community of a woman or a girl that they knew who had either been disappeared, had been murdered, had been raped, and not one of them had reported to police. Not one of them. Because they say, why bother? Why bother?
And we're asking them to trust the same system that has historically harmed them. Totally.
100%. And has harmed, men in their community. And has never, since the first days of European involvement in what we call now call Australia, has never been there to support Aboriginal women. Aboriginal women, my family line, have been removed, have been put into domestic slavery, with all sorts of things happening to them by their white, master of the house. And police have never been there to support. And in fact, police have been perpetrating that violence, particularly in the earlier days of the settlement. So, there's not much trust there, and
there
rightfully
shouldn't be.
so.
Yeah, exactly, rightfully so.
And especially when, you have, like in Queensland at the moment, they've just decided to abandon their domestic violence units. Too hard. Not core business, maybe, is what they think. I don't know. But, what's interesting is a case, and I'm going on a tangent here, but I've been representing and working with a lovely man, Adair Lomas, who unfortunately passed away a couple of months ago, and I have permission from his partner Megan to talk about Adair. But Adair was fighting for justice for his sister Cardell Lomas and Cardell's unborn child. Cardell was killed by her partner in a horrific set of circumstances. And she reported to services, police included, on 23 different occasions in the 10 months leading up to her death.
I was like over and over, but 23
Yeah.
is just so high.
Yep.
Like,
and she was turning up to appointments with service providers with severe physical injuries that were noticeable and noted in files. And so, and the response from police was, oh, well, First Nations people don't trust us, so what are we meant to do? And it's like, no. She went at high risk to her. She went and disclosed on a few occasions to police, and you did nothing. So actually, no, when women, when children, when men, when gender diverse people, when trans people are at their wits' end, you call the police. You have to. There is no one else to call. And you do. And when it lets you down so badly, this is the perpetual experience of First Nations women.
What do you think it is about sexual assault? Like, if these same standards or lack of standards were applied to other crimes, we wouldn't accept it. So what do you think? What do you think it is?
I think it's so widespread. So we know that 1 in 6 children are sexually, and I prefer the term sexually assaulted rather than sexually abused. I think abused can soften the nature of the crime. The crime under law is sexual assault. It used to be called rape. In some areas it still is.
You and I both also prefer the term rape as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, rape's what happened to me.
Let's not water it down.
Yeah. I mean, sexual assault does reflect the diversity of things, but and the breadth, and that's fine. But rape is what happened to me under the legal definition. But 1 in 6 children have experienced sexual violence. For women, it's 1 in 5. And now, alarmingly, we see research that for young women, so girls and young women, 15 to 24, I think it is, there was research released at the end of 2025, that actually that number has now dropped to 1 in 4. So 1 in 4 young women are now being sexually assaulted. And then you've got 1 in 20 men. So this is huge as a society. We consider sexual violence at the upper end of our criminal code. Some sexual violence, for example, aggravated sexual violence of a child, carries a identical or similar sentence to murder. That's how serious our society thinks that these crimes should be treated. Yet it is so widespread. And you've got to ask yourself, and there's just such a lack of research on perpetration. I mean, there's been some recent research done that shows that, I think it's 1 in 10 men have self-identified, and you've got to think, well, I can't imagine many men self-identifying.
Well, exactly. They're the ones who are willing
it's surprising.
to do it in an anonymous survey.
I know. It's surprising that 1 in 10 men actually admit to this, but the numbers would be higher.
Of course.
But they admit to either sexually assaulting a child or having fantasies about doing so. And it's creepy and it's horrible and it makes you shiver. But when this many children, women, gender diverse, trans and men are being sexually assaulted, how many perpetrators are there? There's a lot of perpetrators in our society, and they are in every profession. They are in our judiciary, and we've seen the cases. They are barristers, we've seen the cases. They are lawyers, we've seen the cases. They are politicians, we've seen the cases. Like they are leaders in industry and business. They are influential people. They are also carpenters, plumbers, NRL players, AFL players, professional surfers, golfers. They are lawnmower men. Like they are truck drivers. They are Ivan Milat. They are everywhere in our society, and the willingness of our society to actually say that these men who are a colleague of mine says, Karen, can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, ma'am.
These fuckers, they walk amongst us. They walk amongst us.
Yeah.
And they do.
They're people we know and love, and they're not in jail.
That's right. And, can our legal system deal with this quantity? No. Does that mean we should just turn our backs on it and condone it? Hell no. There has to be some better solutions, and we have to start looking to other jurisdictions into how they're dealing with this as a challenge, but we also need to be dealing with prevention and starting to turn. I mean, it's so alarming that sexual assault is on the rise for young women, not on the decrease. Sexual violence is the only crime in Australia that has increased year on year on year for the last 8 years. And this is not due to an increase in reporting. It's due to an increase in the crime. So you look at the hyper misogyny that exists in things like the manosphere. I mean, misogyny has always existed. It's just been, given a new name through the manosphere and social media. But it's hyper. It's on steroids.
Yeah.
And when you've got high-profile cases of sexual violence, and you're going to have to help me with the name of that rapper in America.
Oh, Diddy.
P. Diddy, right? You look at these high-profile cases, or you look at Epstein. You look at Andrew.
Oh.
I don't even want to say former prince, you know what I mean? Like, I don't even want to dignify him with even, referencing back that he was a prince. I mean, how disgraceful. All of these men being completely unaccountable for their actions, and yet you've got this trail of victim survivors, you included, me included, and many others who speak out about our truth, about what happened, and then we're kind of just left on the scrap heap.
Yeah.
And then you have women like, let's say her name, let's remember her, and I'm going to cry now. But Virginia Giuffre. Virginia Giuffre, who committed suicide on the eve of her truth, on the eve of her book being launched.
I think of...
And what have we, as a society, how are we culpable for this? And that's what is happening every single day. And there is a parliamentary inquiry at the moment going on into the suicides of women who've experienced sexual violence, who've experienced domestic violence. It's completely unrecorded. It's completely unknown. And not just women. There's a man that I know whose son committed suicide after reporting to police. He committed suicide that night. And it is... another young girl who was gang raped at one of these horrible boys' private schools. And she took her own life. She was 19. Now, as a society, we have to fix this.
I think about Christian Porter's alleged victim, Kate.
Yep.
And how that kicked off those sets of rallies. And that's not what it should take.
That's right.
We've stopped for a tissue break. But
We have.
We've spoken about how we have to be outraged.
We do. And our political leaders need to be outraged.
Yeah. I mean, we need to circulate the inquiry like crazy, but how can people give evidence?
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, one of the other mini campaigns,
Add to the list.
have a lot. And, the work we did together through the Law Reform Commission, there was a long list of, this is not just an issue that plays out in the courtroom.
Mm-hmm.
This is an issue that plays out in so many segments of our justice system and our administration system and our insurance system and our financial system. Like, this is, sexual violence permeates through all of our systems in society. And the challenge for that inquiry of people talking openly about the suicides of victim survivors, or if you're a victim survivor, the mental health impact, is what we see, what I've seen in my client base, is it get weaponised against victim survivors for help seeking. So women are, I've had one client who has said she will not see a mental health professional about dealing with childhood sexual abuse because she's worried that that will be used against her in family law court proceedings, and it does. We have instances in my clients where people have been kicked off their insurance, like your insurance that you have through superannuation, your total permanent disability and income protection insurance, that if you have a pre-existing mental health condition, and the only reason you've got the mental health, the only reason you're on the antidepressant, or the only reason you're seeing the psychologist is because of your rape.
What, so now they want to say that it causes mental harm?
Yeah, so then they say, well, you've got a pre-existing mental health condition, so we will not insure you for anything to do with mental health. So if you, for example, see some horrific incident like you were caught up in 9/11 and had PTSD from it, you would not be covered by your TPD, or if you developed a chronic permanent injury, your total permanent disability, or your income protection insurance, because you had a pre-existing disposition to a mental health condition because of a previous sexual assault. I've also seen clients who have been denied workers' compensation because they were bullied at work and attempting to access workers' comp entitlements because of that. And the insurer found through their medical records that they'd been a victim of sexual assault, either as a child or an adult. And so therefore said, well, you're predisposed to a mental health condition. You've already been treated for anxiety or depression, or seen a psychologist, or been on a mental health plan through, the 10 free sessions that you get through the government. So therefore, the mental injury that you've suffered at work from being bullied, that's a pre-existing condition, my friend. No,
this is infuriating. We're going to have to talk more about how to bring awareness to this.
And why we don't have awareness is because how can victim survivors go into those inquiries and say, I've got a mental health injury because of my sexual assault? You're essentially putting on the public record that. And do you reckon that insurance company is going to pay you out for a mental health injury completely to something separate, unrelated, when you've put that on the public record on Hansard in Parliament? Good luck. I mean, it was only yesterday that I was speaking to a lawyer from a different firm who represents employers who are funded through their insurance companies in employment matters, and they routinely ask for a victim's full medical history, and they see the sexual violence records, and they attempt to get out of the insurance claim for workplace bullying because of the previous sexual violence. It is disgusting and despicable, and something that our politicians need to act on, and it's something that I'm actively involved in lobbying in. It's something that, that you and I had made recommendations to the Law Reform Commission on, but it is and when we look at gender inequality in Australia and you look at the wage gap and you look at women having economic independence, well, wouldn't we want an Australia where women and other victim survivors are properly insured? Wouldn't we want that safety net for them? But unfortunately, that safety net is being eroded by quite despicable and, in my view, unethical lawyers. Sorry, peers, but I think you're unethical.
You tell them.
Mic drop.
Your campaign, Make Police Investigate, one of many, as we've just canvassed.
They keep mushrooming.
Yeah, they're just
because of the experiences of my clients.
Well, yeah, because of the needs everywhere.
Like, what can you do? You hear these experiences, and as a lawyer, you try and do what you can, either through the law or through political avenues to try and change the situation.
I think not all lawyers. I think you in particular.
I mean, you're the same. I mean, how can you just sit on your hands?
Yeah.
How can you ignore this?
Make Police Investigate is calling for a legal duty to investigate. What would that change practically?
It would mean that there needs to be some basic investigative steps, not like anything, super duper, but some very basic mandatory steps that need to occur when a victim reports sexual violence at a police station or online or whichever method of reporting they choose, that some basic things occur. And they are basic steps that our community would expect, such as a statement being taken, a sworn statement being taken, evidence collected and stored, not lost, stored. And that when a perpetrator is named or a material witness, like a co-victim or someone who saw it, is named, that they be interviewed and that those named perpetrators are interviewed. Like, that is what I think a very basic minimum. And you might want to say, well, let's start with making these mandatory investigation standards for the most serious sexual assaults. So, look, all sexual assaults are bad. All sexual assaults are illegal. But there is a spectrum of the seriousness of harm. And you could start at the higher end of the spectrum with imposing this duty. There are requirements in some states and territories for police to have to investigate domestic violence, but not sexual violence. They've left the S out.
They've left the S out as per. What do you think about New South Wales trialling exceptional clearance?
Yeah, so look, that's great. However, it's not for all cases.
Yeah.
And what's happening is if you can't get through that front desk of the police station, or you can't get through the hierarchy within that police station, it doesn't get fed in to that system. So we need better checks and balances, but we also need to make sure that we have independent oversight. Because again, referencing that Commission of Inquiry in Queensland in 2022 with Justice Richards, is that when you have, and she said, this is not my words, this is her words, systemic racism, sexism and misogyny, those three words, racism, sexism and misogyny, baked in, hardwired into a police service, into a police system, you've got Buckley's. So you need independent, and this is what she recommended. Is she recommended a completely independent of police, completely separate complaints and oversight body. And that's why the legal minimums need to be legislated, not just codes of practice or codes of conduct that are like an employment policy at work of, don't, do this or that at work. They're not legally enforceable. So we need legally enforceable duties and minimum things that police need to do, that if they don't do them, there is an independent, separate oversight body that goes and checks and says, oh, guys, you missed that step. And the Northern Ireland model says, well, if the victim has lost complete trust and faith in the police, then you know what? We're going to have the power ourselves to go and just redo that investigation. And we've got the statutory powers to do that. And we'll just do the investigation, because that way we're not re-traumatising the victim. Because what we see is police, when you complain at the moment to the police conduct commissions, and you see it in different jurisdictions, it's approximately 95% of cases of complaints about police conduct. 95% go back to the same police station that you were complaining about. Now, when you've got a police station of 10 people, what do you how do you think that's going to go? Police investigating police is an issue, as old as this country. Well, as old as English people arriving in this country. It is a global issue.
Yeah.
It is where corruption festers. Self-regulation of industries is very rare. And we need those independent bodies to be evaluating whether police did or didn't do their job. And then where they didn't do their job, taking it out of their hands and doing it properly. Otherwise, you're just re-victimising the victim by putting them through that police process again.
What do you think justice looks like for victims who have had their cases wrongly closed by police?
Yep.
The Law Reform Commission made some recommendations, as we know. What do you think about those recommendations?
I think there's a lot that our politicians can be doing. We're now, I think it's 2 years now after
2 years.
since or more than since Mark Dreyfus, who was then the Honourable Mark Dreyfus, our former Attorney General, had that report handed to him by the Law Reform Commission. There's then been an election. He has now been replaced by the Honourable Michelle Rowland as Attorney General. We just seem to have gone into that void again. And politically, there is a lot in that Law Reform Commission report. States and territories seem to be quite slow off the mark, if they're even on the mark. Have they even turned up at the starting line? I don't know. Are they doing their stretches anywhere? I don't think so. So there is so much that can be done, and yet, and the scale of the problem is so big. So this is a question for our politicians and our Prime Minister. Why the delay? When this is such a problem for so many children, girls, women, gender diverse, trans and men, why are we so slow as a country to respond? And the recommendations are there. The recommendations are there in coronial inquests. The recommendations are everywhere
Royal
around.
Commissions, all of it.
All of it, right? Like
who's with the police, with the minimum standards of investigation and a legally enforceable duty of care,
which we haven't actually spoken about. So
I know
the duty of care. So at the moment, what you find is that police will have a duty of care for example, if someone's in custody. So if they're in the lockup, police have absolute duty of care over that person. They are in a jail cell, and police have responsibility essentially to keep them alive and well, to not injure them, to not
cause harm,
have them die on their watch, for example. There is a duty of care. A victim, as a random member of the public, the duty of care to not harm them is incredibly lacking. And what we find and where the harm is occurring is in these big silences, is in the doing nothing, is in the haven't heard from them for several years. That is the psychological harm that happens to victims, and it can be easily solved.
Well, what you're asking for is so commonsensical. Who's resisting?
Well, unfortunately, you and I have raised this through the Law Reform Commission. The Law Reform Commission went touch it. The former Attorney General Mark Dreyfus specifically put police responses in their scope. There's one or two out of the, how many recommendations?
64.
64. There's one or two that relate to police, but it's nothingness in my view. But I've personally written to every Attorney General in every state and territory. I've written to the Prime Minister. I've written to our federal Attorney General. I've written to federal ministers for women, for women's safety, for all sorts. And we've had a petition with over 50,000 Australians not only sign it, but leave their comments and share their own personal stories in those comments. We've had the opinion polling commissioned through Essential Media to show that 88% of Australians think this is a great idea. Yeah. That is higher polling than same-sex marriage. This is an electoral winner.
Yeah.
And of the 12% of people that don't want it, who are they? Who are they?
True. Who are they?
Whose side of this do you want to be on?
Can we find out who they are and investigate them?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good start, right? But, it's an electoral winner. So why aren't our politicians acting on and these are not just my recommendations.
Yeah.
These have been developed by peers of mine in the profession, by fellow solicitors and barristers. This is a well-researched, well-evidenced, sensible solution. And in terms of police saying, well, we have to use discretion on what we do and don't investigate, look, yes, but not for the most serious crimes. No. Cut it out. Time to move, we need to get with the times. Is it really, some of these other things that are being investigated, are they as much or more of a priority than these type of crimes? No, they're not. We need to get on with it as a society.
Where does independent legal representation
it's critical.
fit into this?
It's critical. I mean, you and I have had that experience. You and I have engaged our own lawyers to help us navigate and get through police.
And just have them do what their job is. It's not doing anything extra.
Cops do your job, right?
Cops do your job.
No, make police investigate. That's the official tagline, makepoliceinvestigate.org. But you, in my view and in my clients' experience and what they come to us for, is to help them get police to see them as a serious victim and to actually follow the process that they should and actually do what the community expects their job is. And unfortunately, that is why you need a lawyer. And you also need a lawyer in court, because the prosecution is there to represent the state of New South Wales, the state of Western Australia. They're there to represent the interests of the state, not the interests of the victim. And they are different. The interests of the victim are about keeping the victim well and safe through that process. And that is why they need an advocate in court. And the reason why I'm so firm on we need, and I know you are, on independent lawyers, not social workers, not counsellors, but lawyers, is because there is lawyer-client privilege. So everything a victim says to that lawyer when they're making critical decisions about whether they should or shouldn't report, whether they should or shouldn't access mental health support given the impacts on their insurance or a family law case or what have you, all of these things cannot be touched by a vindictive defendant. And we've seen that in high-profile cases with the defendant Bruce Lehrmann. We're now seeing it with 1-800-RESPECT, who are a privately run government. It's government service, 1-800-RESPECT, but it's run by a private provider. They're getting called by these defence lawyers, and you can imagine the young people perhaps who answer these phone calls from these defence lawyers who might be a bit bullish and receiving subpoenas, and instead of understanding the law, that actually no, they're confidential counselling records. They're just handing them over. Yeah. Handing them over to the defendant. How outrageous. So that is why we cannot have the government, lovely that they're investing in what they're now calling justice system navigators. But we need the protection for victims, that their communication, that their decision-making about what they want to do is with a lawyer so that they can receive legal advice, not someone's opinion, uneducated, well-meaning, but uneducated because they are not a lawyer. They cannot give legal advice. It is illegal for a social worker to give legal advice. It is illegal for a mental health counsellor to give legal advice. There's penalties. It's in New South Wales, it's 6 months jail. Like, it's serious.
More than most perpetrators will get.
I know, right? Like, it's serious stuff. And it's like if you were a doctor, you can't go giving medical advice unless you're a doctor. So we need independent lawyers. And it's funny also saying independent lawyers. It's actually just because a lawyer is not independent in the sense that they are there fighting for you every step of the way. They are there representing you. They believe you. They are in your corner and they are going to stick up for you. And that's what victims need, is someone to stick up for them.
You have been such a wealth of knowledge, Karen. I feel like you can pull from an endless pile of facts. And I mean, it just shows how clear the evidence is and how ridiculous that these things aren't being implemented. My last question to you is something personal. It's what keeps you motivated to do this work when the system fails over and over? You, your clients, me, the people you work with, what keeps you motivated?
I think when you have lived it, you can't put it down. And as a Aboriginal woman, I feel a sense of obligation and responsibility to use my education, to use my position in the legal profession to make change for my people, for my women. And that is I see that as my cultural responsibility. I also grew up, a lot of my heritage is Scottish, and I had an aunt, so my grandmother's sister, who really instilled in me the value that if you have an education, she didn't have an education. If you have an education, you bloody well use it. And this is the thing that, when you have experienced these things, it is you. It becomes you. And it's a crappy thing, that sexual violence, that it is ingrained in you. But it doesn't have to be a negative thing. And we talk about, you and I identify with the term victim. I'm a victim of a crime. That doesn't mean that I have victim mentality. It doesn't mean that you or I are sitting in I just had a cry a minute ago about Virginia Giuffre, but it doesn't mean that we're sitting in a corner with a box of tissues, every day. That actually doing this work, if done in a trauma-informed and safe way, with all of the mental health supports around you that you need so that you don't absorb it, that you don't re-traumatise yourself doing it, it can be a site of healing. And there's many feminist authors that have spoken about doing the work is healing. But I think even in The Body Keeps the Score, the author speaks about doing the work in a safe way can be healing. But when you've had these things happen to yourself, to your friends, to family members, to community members, how can you turn away from them? And we must lean into this conversation as a society. We can't keep saying, oh, rape's a horrible word. Oh, I don't want to know about that. We have to get over it. And the only way we're going to fix it is by people leaning into this space, getting active and using their professional skills to start doing something about it. Because I bet you bottom dollar that whatever profession you're in, whatever trade you're in, whatever occupation you're in, and even if you're not in the workforce, volunteer. get involved. That's the way we're going to make change, and that is that self-sustaining. I mean, the hope that we will get there at some point. It might not be while I'm still alive, but at some point something will tip the scales. I doubt it's going to be me. It hasn't been me so far. I'll put it that way. But at some point we will.
Yeah.
And but we need to keep building that wall. We need to keep having all of us making the human pyramid so that we can stand on the shoulders of others and others can stand on our shoulders. So we've got to keep going, but we've got to do it in a sustaining way. For me, the beach.
Yeah.
For me, getting on country on the Hawkesbury River in New South Wales, just north of Sydney, Jarubban, and Gunninday, the Lower Macdonald River, where my ancestors are from, putting my feet in that river.
I'm just picturing it.
That's the shit, right? That's what keeps me going. And having a good old sunbake and getting a few extra skin cancers. Feeling the sun on my skin, that rejuvenates me, and having that mental break and giving you the resilience to keep going.
Thank you so much for being raw and honest and incredibly knowledgeable and outraged and inspiring. It is such an honour to be next to you and work with you always.
Right back at you. And if I ever started a podcast series, which I doubt I would have the courage to do, you will be my first guest, Sarah, because you are equally as knowledgeable, experienced, professional and passionate, and your work deserves to be spotlighted as well. So thank you so much. It's an absolute honour to sit alongside you in this work.
If you've listened this far, you already know something most Australians don't. Victim survivors are the only people in sexual offence trials without their own lawyer. That doesn't have to stay true, but justice systems don't change because they quietly evolve. They change because people understand them and demand better. Go to withyouwecan.org to be a part of that demand. This has been What No One Told Us.